The USS Vanguard, a colossal warship bristling with advanced weaponry, hovered just beyond the gravitational pull of Artaelis. The planet, a glowing blue jewel encased in a. General Victor Harlo stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, his jaw. "We gave them a chance," Harlo muttered. His voice was cold, a low growl. Diplomatic channels, offers of peaceful coexistence. They ignored everyone. Instead, they escalated their kid. Beside him, Commander Elise Trent, his second-in-command, adjusted her neural interface, her gaze sharp and calculating. "They didn't just ignore us," she said, her voice steady. "They infiltrated us. 300 men disappeared last month alone. Families torn apart, lives disrupted." She paused, her brows furrowing. "This isn't just a rescue mission. It's retaliation." The air on the bridge was heavy, charged with a mixture of resolve and trepidation. Beyond the massive viewing panels, the swirling nebula glowed faintly, casting shifting shadows across the crew. "Prepare the drop ships," Harlo ordered. "Our mission is clear. Neutralize the threat, secure our people, and ensure they can never threaten Earth again." The alien women of Artaelis, known as the Zelari, were renowned for their grace and cunning. They were tall, lithe, and adorned with shimmering bioluminescent patterns that glowed in hues of blue and violet. While their appearances captivated, their intelligence and ferocity in battle were legendary. Deep within Artaelis, in a sprawling citadel carved into the cliffs of an emerald sea, High Matriarch Lysira convened with her council. "The humans advance," Lysira declared, her voice resonant and commanding. "They believe us to be invaders, but we act out of desperation, not malice. Without the Terrans, our race will fade into oblivion." One of her advisors, a warrior named Cinera, frowned. "They will not listen to reason, Matriarch. Their warships are a testament to their intent. We must defend ourselves." Lysira nodded solemnly. "And we shall. But remember, the fate of our people depends on capturing as many males as we can. Their genes are vital for our survival." Above the planet, the human fleet began its descent. Drop ships pierced the atmosphere like fiery arrows, their engines roaring as they navigated the turbulent skies. The first wave of ground forces landed near the outskirts of a Zelari settlement. The alien architecture was a breathtaking fusion of nature and technology. Towering spires intertwined with crystalline trees, their glowing canopies illuminating the landscape in a serene blue light. Harlo's boots hit the ground with a dull thud as he disembarked from his drop ship, flanked by squads of heavily armed soldiers. "Secure the perimeter," he barked. But the Zelari were ready. From the shadows emerged warriors armed with energy-based weapons that emitted crackling arcs of violet lightning. Their combat skills were unmatched, moving with a fluidity and precision that unnerved even the most battle-hardened Marines. Commander Trent, leading a flanking team, activated her exosuit's plasma shield just in time to deflect a bolt of energy. "They're fast," she muttered, her voice crackling over the comms. "Stay focused," Harlo replied. "They're not invincible." The battlefield erupted into chaos. Human soldiers unleashed barrages of kinetic projectiles, while the Zelari retaliated with energy bursts and tactical maneuvers. The lush terrain became a smoldering war zone, the once pristine landscape scarred by fire and blood. Amidst the battle, a Zelari strike team executed a daring maneuver. Utilizing their cloaking technology, they infiltrated the human ranks and captured several soldiers, including Harlo. When Harlo regained consciousness, he found himself in a dimly lit chamber, restrained by bonds of glowing energy. High Matriarch Lysira stood before him, her glowing patterns dimmed, a sign of her weariness. "General Harlo," she said, her tone measured, "you and your kind view us as monsters. But tell me, if your species faced extinction, would you not do whatever it takes to survive?" Harlo's gaze was steely. "You can't justify kidnapping and experimenting on innocent people. Whatever your plight, there are lines you don't cross." Lysira's expression softened, a flicker of sorrow in her eyes. "Perhaps, but desperation has a way of blurring those lines. Still, I am not without mercy. Help us willingly, and I will ensure the safe return of your men." Harlo remained silent, his mind racing. The Zelari's plight was undeniable, but their methods were abhorrent. Could a compromise be reached? Or was war the only answer? Unbeknownst to both the humans and the Zelari, a third force loomed in the shadows. The aggressive Yalvak, a race of biomechanical marauders, had detected the conflict and saw an opportunity to conquer a weakened Artaelis. As the battle raged on, Yalvak ships emerged from the nebula, their sleek, insect-like designs glinting ominously. Without warning, they unleashed a barrage of plasma torpedoes on both sides, sowing chaos. Harlo, still in captivity, felt the ground tremble as explosions rocked the citadel. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. Lysira's expression darkened. "The Yalvak, predators who feast on the vulnerable." She turned to her guards. "Release the human. If we do not unite, we will all perish." Back on the battlefield, human and Zelari forces found themselves fighting side by side against the Yalvak onslaught. Harlo, now armed and freed, coordinated with Lysira. "We can't outgun them," he said, "but if we combine our tech, we might outsmart them." Lysira nodded. "Our energy shields can fortify your ships, and your explosives can disrupt their hive network." As the combined forces rallied, the tide began to turn. But the Yalvak were relentless, adapting with each passing moment. The story continues to unfold as alliances are tested, secrets unravel, and the fate of two worlds hangs in the balance. Will the uneasy partnership between humans and Zelari endure? Or will their differences doom them all in the face? The battlefield quieted briefly as the combined human-Zelari forces regrouped. Smoke from the Yalvak's attack choked the once pristine skies of Artaelis, and the ground was littered with the fallen from all sides. General Harlo paced alongside Lysira in a makeshift command tent constructed from a mix of human and Zelari materials. Holographic displays flickered, showing the latest intelligence on. "Our window is small," Harlo said, his voice tense. "The Yalvak are regrouping, and if we don't act quickly, they'll—" Lysira, standing tall despite her exhaustion, gestured toward the map. "We can divert their forces by luring them toward the Irisan chasm. Its magnetic anomalies will interfere with their our cause." "Enough." Harlo's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "We're wasting time. The Yalvak aren't going to wait for us to resolve our diff." A heavy silence fell over the room. Lysira broke it with a sigh. "We have no choice but to trust each other, however uneasy that tear." The plan was audacious. Human ships, reinforced with Zelari energy shields, would bait the Yalvak fleet toward the Irisan chasm while ground forces secured key positions to prevent the Yalvak FR. Harlo and Lysira stood side by side on the command bridge of the USS Vanguard. "Are your people ready?" Harlo asked, glancing at Lysira. She nodded. "As ready as yours, I." The Vanguard led. "Evasive maneuvers," Trent shouted from her station. "Incoming plasma torpedoes." The Vanguard V. "Shields are failing on the starboard side," a Zelari engineer reported, her voice. "Divert auxiliary power." Harlo. The Yalvak pursued relentlessly, their ships descending like a swarm of locusts. As the fleet neared the Irisan chasm, the plan's risk became evident. Magnetic storms flared, disrupting communications and navigation systems. On the ground, Lysira's warriors and Harlo's soldiers fought side by side, holding choke points against the Yalvak's ground forces. The aliens' biomechanical drones were monstrous, their limbs twisting and reforming to counter every attack. Trent, leading a team through dense jungle terrain, wiped blood and grime from her face as she shouted over the comms. "We can't hold this position much longer." A crackling voice responded. It was Lysira. "Reinforcements are en route. Hold your ground." Above them, the Vanguard and its fleet unleashed everything they had. Missile after missile slammed into the Yalvak fleet, but the enemy continued to adapt. Harlo turned to Lysira, his voice grim. "If this doesn't work—" "It will work," Lysira said firmly, though her expression betrayed her uncertainty. "It must." The fleet lured the Yalvak deeper into the chasm. As predicted, the magnetic anomalies began to wreak havoc on their systems. Several Yalvak ships collided with one another, their hive-like formations collapsing. Now's our chance, Harlo shouted. All units, concentrate fire. Explosions lit up the chasm as the combined forces launched a coordinated assault. The Yalvak fleet began to crumble, their once impenetrable formation reduced to chaos. By the time the last Yalvak ship was destroyed, the battlefield was eerily quiet. The human and Zelari forces, battered and exhausted, regrouped to assess their losses. The Vanguard hovered in low orbit, its hull scorched and its systems barely functioning. Harlo sat slumped in his command chair, his face drawn. "We did it," Trent said softly, though her tone was devoid of triumph. "But at what cost?" On the surface, Lysira stood amidst the ruins of her city, her glowing patterns dimmed to a faint pulse. Around her, Zelari and human soldiers tended to the wounded. Harlo approached, his boots crunching on the scorched ground. "We won't forget what your people sacrificed today," he said. Lysira met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Nor will we forget what your people endured. But this alliance was born of necessity, not trust. What happens now?" Harlo hesitated. The war with the Yalvak had forced them to set aside their differences, but the underlying tension between humans and Zelari remained. "We rebuild," he said finally, "and we talk. For real this time." Lysira inclined her head, though her expression remained guarded. "Then let us hope we can find common ground before desperation forces our hand again." Unbeknownst to the victorious forces, the Yalvak were not defeated entirely. Deep within the Irisan chasm, fragments of their biomechanical ships stirred, their systems slowly regenerating. And far from Artaelis, on the edge of the galaxy, other Yalvak fleets were mobilizing, drawn by the signals of their fallen brethren. On Earth, reports of Zelari infiltrators continued to surface. Despite the temporary truce, mistrust between humans and Zelari simmered, threatening to reignite hostilities. Harlo, aboard the Vanguard, gazed out at the distant stars. "This isn't over," he muttered to himself. Back on Artaelis, Lysira stared at the scorched horizon, her thoughts heavy. Survival had come at a cost, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle had only just begun. Weeks passed as both human and Zelari forces worked to rebuild what the Yalvak assault had shattered. On Artaelis, human engineers collaborated with Zelari scientists to create hybrid technologies, tools designed not only for defense but also to rebuild trust between the two civilizations. Yet beneath the veneer of cooperation, tensions simmered. Harlo and Lysira stood in the council chambers of the Zelari citadel, overlooking the Emerald Sea. The air between them was heavy with unspoken truths. "We've come this far," Lysira said, her glowing patterns faint but steady. "But this alliance is fragile. Your people do not trust mine, and I fear mine will never forgive yours for the blue." Harlo leaned against the railing, his gaze distant. "Trust isn't built overnight. But for what it's worth, I believe this is our best shot at peace." Before Lysira could respond, an urgent comm signal interrupted their conversation. A human officer burst into the room, his face paw. "General, High Matriarch," he stammered. "The Yalvak, they've returned." The Yalvak assault fleet descended upon Artaelis with terrifying precision. This time, their ships had adapted to the magnetic anomalies of the Irisan chasm, their technology more advanced and their force. On board the USS Vanguard, Trent's brow furrowed. "We need a weapon, something decisive. The hybrid tech might give us an edge." Lysira appeared on the main view screen, her expression resolute. "There is one possibility," she said, "but it is dangerous, catastrophic, even." She explained that the Zelari had developed an ancient superweapon hidden deep beneath the surface of Artaelis, a relic from a time when their ancestors had faced extinction at the hands of another enemy. The weapon could generate an energy wave capable of obliterating all Yalvak ships within its range. "But there's a cost," Lysira warned. "The weapon will devastate our planet as well. It may render Artaelis uninhabitable." Harlo exchanged a glance with Trent. The decision was monumental. Sacrifice the planet to save both species, or risk total annihilation. As the Yalvak swarmed the skies, Harlo and Lysira led a joint mission to activate the weapon. Their team, composed of both human soldiers and Zelari warriors, descended into the planet's core where the ancient device lay dormant. The journey was treacherous. Yalvak drones, sensing their movements, launched attacks at every turn. Soldiers fell, their sacrifices buying precious time. When they reached the weapon, it was a sight to behold. A massive crystalline structure pulsing with dormant energy. Zelari glyphs covered its surface, glowing faintly as Lysira approached. "This is it," she said softly, her fingers tracing the ancient symbols. "The heart of our ancestors' despair." Harlo stepped forward. "Can it be activated in time?" Lysira nodded but hesitated. Once activated, there's no turning back. The team worked quickly, connecting power cells and stabilizing energy conduits. As the weapon powered up, the ground shook violently, and fissures split the surface above. The Yalvak fleet descended en masse, their ships raining destruction upon the planet. On the surface, human and Zelari forces fought valiantly, holding the line as the weapon charged. Inside the control chamber, Lysira entered the final sequence, her glowing patterns pulsing rapidly. Harlo placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're sure about this?" he asked. "No," she admitted, "but we have no other choice." The weapon activated with a deafening hum. A brilliant wave of energy erupted from the planet's core, engulfing the Yalvak fleet in an instant. Ships disintegrated, their biomechanical forms shattering like glass. The energy wave continued to spread, consuming everything in its path. On the surface, soldiers watched in awe as the Yalvak dissolved into nothingness. But their victory was bittersweet. The planet beneath their feet trembled, its very foundation crumbling. Harlo and Lysira barely escaped the control chamber as the weapon collapsed into itself. They emerged on the surface to see the devastation. The once vibrant landscape of Artaelis was now a barren wasteland, its skies darkened by ash. Evacuation efforts were swift. Human ships carried the surviving Zelari to orbit, their people now refugees without a home. Aboard the USS Vanguard, Harlo and Lysira stood side by side, watching the ruined planet fade into the distance. "We've won," Harlo said, though his voice lacked conviction. Lysira shook her head. "We've survived. There's a difference." In the following weeks, humans and Zelari worked together to establish a new settlement on a neutral planet. Though mistrust lingered, their shared sacrifice forged a bond that could not be broken. As Harlo prepared to leave for Earth, he turned to Lysira. "You've lost your home, but not your people. That's what matters." Lysira nodded, her glowing patterns faint but steady. "And you, General, have earned the trust of mine. Let us hope it will be enough to face whatever comes next." In the distant void of space, remnants of the Yalvak stirred, their signals faint but unmistakable. The battle had been won, but the war for survival was far from over.